Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 5, Rock and Reefer. Brian and Martin immediately struck up a close friendship. The band idea was great. The problem was a place to practice. There were loads of church halls, but they had zero budget. Nothing nearby was vacant anyway. Martin said he'd ask his dad if they could use the waiting room at the doctor's surgery, which was right below where they lived on the 2 upper floors. Brian introduced Martin to Ian, the bass player, at the youth club. Ian said he'd come round and help Martin sort out his guitar. Ian took the guitar apart in Martin's bedroom, obviously having done it more than once before. With the windows wide open, he sprayed it matte black. All Martin needed was an amplifier. Improvisation was called for. Martin discovered that the family radiogram had an auxiliary input at the rear of the chassis. With his soldering iron, he managed to rig up a lead that would connect his guitar to the radiogram. It wasn't properly earthed, but it worked. Now he just had to win his dad over. "Dad, can I ask you a favour?" "Oh my God, what is it now?" "Well, you know Brian, who plays drums? He's found a bass player and a singer. We just need somewhere to practice." "So what's that got to do with me?" "Well, I was wondering, the waiting room isn't used on Sundays. It's big enough for a band. Maybe we could play there for a couple of hours? It won't be too loud, I promise." "Goodness me, you mean a whole group with drums? I like a bit of peace and quiet on Sundays." "But Dad, you're nearly always out after lunch, and Mum's usually in the garden." "Look, we'll give it a try for one Sunday, but if it's too loud, you'll have to find somewhere else." "Ah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Dad." That Sunday morning, Martin struggled down the stairs to the ground floor waiting room with the family radiogram. He had to drag it and then slide it down on its side. It was a bulky piece of early 60s technology encased in an elegant teak cabinet. It was totally unsuited to the rigours of amplifying an electric guitar, but better than nothing. Brian arrived with his drum kit crammed into his dad's car. Brian was setting his drums up when Ian arrived, also chauffeured by his dad. He had a proper amplifier and large bass speaker cabinet. He also had a shiny new bass. Singer Steve breezed in, carrying a microphone with a long lead. He plugged into the bass amplifier as they had no PA system. Martin busied himself connecting his new guitar to the radiogram. The others chuckled, but it worked. Born to be Wild was a good one to jam on, and everyone knew House of the Rising Sun, which was in the charts again. These formed the basis of the first elongated jam sessions. When everyone else ran out of ideas, Brian did a drum solo. He could whiz round the kit for 5 minutes or more, combining just about everything in his percussive vocabulary. It was impressive, but boy was it loud. Brian didn't do quiet. He whacked the drums and cymbals as if they were his worst enemy. Martin struggled to be heard, mostly getting swamped by the rest of the band. It was still the best fun. Martin felt like a real guitarist at last, not just a bedroom hero. The neighbours didn't find it fun. There were complaints about the noise. Summer rolled on. Rehearsals continued until the end of the summer holidays. Martin's dad said they had to stop. Steve said he was fed up and didn't want to sing anymore. Ian announced he was joining another band who had gigs. On the last Sunday, in the middle of a jam session, the radiogram speaker suddenly emitted a loud bang. There was a blue flame and a puff of smoke. Martin's guitar fell silent. Everyone laughed, except Martin. Martin's bedroom had become quite the cosy teenage den. The wallpaper was slowly disappearing under clippings and photos from music magazines. Even the ceiling wasn't spared. The bed along one wall made a comfy seat for 2 or 3, and an old sofa nestled below the window, his favourite place to sit and practice guitar. The stereo system took up the wall opposite. 2 homemade speakers and 2 mono valve amplifiers in open chassis form, their glowing red valves adding vibes to the darkened room in the evening. He now had a decent record deck and his dad's tape recorder, which now spent more time in Martin's room than in his dad's study. The room smelt of joss sticks, which were a futile attempt to mask the smell of tobacco. His dad let him smoke now, despite his mum's disapproval. His mum would also have disapproved of him smoking joints, which he had begun to do regularly, but not at home. His bedroom would soon become the venue for evenings with 4 or 5 of his friends, the air getting so thick with cigarette smoke you couldn't see across the room. As yet, it was the place where his sister's boyfriend and his friends could hang out on occasional weekend visits. Martin's sister Jane was going out with a lanky young man called Liam. He used to bring round armfuls of blues and what people called underground bands, all very new and exciting for Martin. Liam's best mate was called Paul, a cheeky chappie with a Keith Moon, dear boy, posh accent and a wicked sense of humour. He also had excellent weed. Martin felt distinctly odd. The music was growling from his speakers relentlessly, sounding like a band of lunatics. It was actually the first time he'd heard Velvet Underground. He knew he was in his bedroom. He could hear the echoey voices of his sister and her friends, but things were a bit swimmy, and he could have sworn he was looking down at himself on his bed from the ceiling. It dawned on him that he was just really, really stoned, and it would probably wear off a bit if he just relaxed. "You okay, dear boy?" Paul looked a little concerned. "Yeah, I think so. Jesus, what was that?" "Finest Colombian bush, my friend. Knocks your socks off, doesn't it?" "You can say that again." "I need some tea and biscuits or something." "Good idea, dear boy. Can I give you a hand?" "No, I think I can manage." Martin treaded gingerly on the way downstairs to the kitchen. His sense of balance wasn't quite what it could have been. Having arrived in the kitchen, he went through the process, talking out loud. "Right, kettle on, water in kettle, kettle on, good. So, 4 teaspoons and 1 for the pot. Milk, fridge, right, sugar, bowl. Okay, biscuits, plate, biscuits, good. Tray. Yep, that should do." The kettle boiled and Martin began to pour the water into the teapot. His mind wandered and he absent-mindedly turned slightly so that the water missed the pot and filled the tray instead, making the biscuits soggy. "You okay, Martin?" Martin froze at the sound of his dad's voice. He stuttered a reply. Yeah, Dad, I'm fine, thanks." He obviously wasn't, but his dad left him to it. Martin cleared up and took the tea tray up to his room. Liam had already rolled the next joint, but Martin declined. He was still buzzing from the first one. Jane didn't smoke, so Liam popped the joint into his breast pocket for later. After they'd gone, Martin heard a voice from downstairs. "Martin, come down here, will you?" He was summoned into his dad's sanctuary study and stood nervously while his dad closed the door quietly. "I don't want your mother to hear this. Now listen, I've told you it's okay to smoke at home, although your mother disapproves, but she is very upset that the whole house stinks of pot. I'm not going to lecture you about drugs, but you will not smoke pot in the house. Is that understood?" "Yes, Dad. Sorry, Dad." "Between you and me, I smoked a little opium when I was in the Navy. Only once, mind you, so I can't tell you it's wrong. But just don't overdo it. And for God's sake, stay away from anything stronger, okay?" "Okay, Dad, thanks." Martin inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. His father could be a grumpy bastard sometimes, but if anything, he was fair. In this case, surprisingly open-minded.